Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar with the British Remain Chamber of Commerce. I'm Neil McGregor, Chairman of the Chamber. I'm very pleased to introduce our guests from this afternoon. If you will look in the chat box, if you're watching us on Teams, you will find a link to the page of the Chamber's website, which gives details of our speakers and of this afternoon. So this is Lean Thinking, case studies from around the world. I'm very pleased to say that this afternoon our speakers, Constantin, we all know, who is here in Bucharest with Enviso, and his fellow speakers, Darina Lepadatu, Thomas Janosky, and John Dennis, who are located in, I think, Georgia, North Carolina, and Wearside. So really we cover the world today, to say nothing of those of you who are watching. Welcome to those of you who are watching us also live on Facebook. Usually we find that the audience on Facebook is a multiple of our audience on Zoom. So welcome. If you have questions, you'll find a Q&A box and also a chat box. And if you're using the Zoom application, you'll see those in the bottom of your screen. If you're watching us on Facebook, you won't have that. If you put your questions there, my colleagues in the chamber will keep an eye upon the questions there and will pass those questions on to our speakers at the end of their presentations. So enough from me. Can I welcome Darina? I think you're going to be our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. It's so great to see everybody. Obviously, I would have liked to see you all in person, but at least now we can, let's say, have more of a global outreach. So just a few things about me. I was born in Romania and I have immigrated to the United States 20 years ago. And when I arrived in Lexington, Kentucky on a scholarship for my PhD studies, I obviously knew, Kentucky is the horse capital of the world, but it turned out that I was exposed to more exciting things for my PhD research. Not many of you may know that Kentucky is hosting the largest Toyota factory in the world in Georgetown. And at that time, I think lean thinking and lean systems were just emerging in Eastern Europe. So this was just a wonderful opportunity for me to start to do more research on lean management. And I've started to collaborate with Tom, who was a professor at the University of Kentucky, and it's been just an incredible research journey ever since. So I will try to share my screen with the PowerPoint. Okay, and now I have a problem sharing the PowerPoint. So it was there before and now it's not available.
This is all part of showing you can cope with unexpected situations.
Right? Let me see if I can share it in the chat. Oh, interesting.
Right. Can we have a Stefan, can we have a workaround? Do you have the slides? Can you share them?
Anna has the slides.
Right. Anna, perhaps you can share.
Oh.
I'm sure we'll find a solution to this.
Absolutely, in just a second.
Ah, here we go. Thank you, Anna.
Are you sharing them, Anna? Awesome. Well. Oh, perfect. Okay, so maybe you will help me, Anna, with moving through the slides then, if you don't mind to go to the next slide. Awesome. Yes, so obviously the lean practitioners and lean consultants know that lean philosophy was first started and associated with the auto industry and arriving in the United States. Obviously, we had a booming car industry. This is a map of the auto operations in the United States. As you can see, a lot of the auto industry is concentrated in the northern part of the United States, but recently, over the past decades, it gradually also moved to the south. Before we start our presentation, we wanted to acknowledge the support that we have received from a federal grant, National Science Foundation, that we had received during the President Obama's administration, which had manufacturing as one of the national priorities for research. So working with Tom was really great, because he got to travel more to visit the car factories in Indiana and Ohio and Illinois, and I covered some of the car factories in the South, in Georgia, in Alabama, Tennessee. So it really worked well for us to join our efforts. Moving from here, but we also traveled to many factories outside the United States. We visited factories in Germany and in Italy, and in Brazil and in Mexico. So for those who are not very familiar maybe with the term lean production, we have a definition that we used in our work. And obviously the first question is, why are two sociologists interested in lean production, which is more often associated with management and with industrial engineering? So where does our interest come from? But we obviously wanted to point out that lean production includes some hard aspects of industrial engineering. But we also and especially look at the social side of lean production. So some of the known hard aspects of lean are, the just-in-time production. Lean production operates on a pull system. Products are manufactured if there is a demand for customer, and factories do not keep much stock and inventory on site. They're very standardized operations, and job rotation is a defining feature. Workers usually rotate their jobs every 2 hours to eliminate monotony and to hurt their joints. Continuous improvement is another major aspect of lean systems. There's literally an obsession with quality and producing zero defects. And we obviously, as sociologists, were more intrigued of the social parts of lean, the long-term orientation, the long-term philosophy, investing in keeping employees long-term. Teamwork is absolutely central to lean production. Teams are empowered to take decisions. They have the freedom to stop the assembly line if they catch defects. I think lean systems are based on very intensive training of workers to take decisions on the spot and fix defects to improve quality. And one of the last elements that we added actually to this definition is the use of temporary workers. Through all the factories that we visited, we've noticed that contract workers or temporary workers are a part of this model. About 20% of the workforce being contract workers. So they are outsourced from staffing agencies and sometimes are let go during times of recession. So, the loyalty to hiring workers for life can be achieved only by, or can be balanced with the use of temporary workers. And from here, would like to move to the next slide to introduce our most recent publication. So the Cambridge International Handbook of Lean Production was just released actually in April. So we're really happy to have this talk. We have worked with more than 40 authors from around the world. They have worked on various chapters of the handbook. We think it brings an important contribution to the field of lean production, especially after more than 30 years since the book produced by MIT, The Machine That Changed the World. And this was really an exciting endeavor, especially in the middle of the pandemic. We're happy to see this book published, while really we were in the middle of the worst pandemic of the century, right? So we had worked with collaborators from literally every continent, every corner of the world. Some went through, COVID infection, their family members had infections, divorces, or they moved to other countries, but they worked with us till the end, and we're happy to share this book with you. And now I will let Tom go into a little bit more detail about various parts of the handbook.
Okay, thank you, Darina. I also would like to thank the International Lean and Six Sigma Institute for this award. As I mentioned to them before, it's not often that an edited book gets an award, so I appreciate it very much, or we appreciate it very much. In this presentation, I'll cover the 3 sections of the handbook: the theory, the industry, and the country. I'll go over a number of different chapters with perhaps 1 sentence or 2 sentences, but I'll concentrate on 2 particular chapters a little bit more. That'll be the chapter on lean production in software, which I think is quite innovative, and I'll concentrate on the lean production in India and Australia, which illustrates some of the problems, concerning lean production. So first of all, theories of lean. This gets to one of the major impetuses we had to do this handbook, and that was, first of all, to establish that lean production was the dominant form of the division of labor in the world today, just like Fordism had been the dominant division of labor. But lean production, although it's not everywhere, just like Fordism was not everywhere, lean production, we believe, is the dominant division of labor. In chapter 2 on management, Katsuki Aoki talks very broadly about lean production, more so than I thought he would. He talks about 3 different kinds of theories in management: functionalist or rationalist theory, secondly, critical theories of lean production, which I did not expect him to talk about, and the paradox approach to lean production. My experience with that had come from Sono, Shimizu, and Takeuchi in their book, Extreme Toyota, but he provides a extensive history before that concerning paradox theories. And for instance, emphasizing that Toyota has certain principles that oftentimes they contradict those principles in practice. Then he points to 2 new kinds of theory: practice theory and socio-materiality theory, which I think is similar to socio-technical theory, balancing the people with the machines and so on. So I think his chapter is an excellent introductory chapter, even though it is mainly from the management point of view. The 3rd chapter is on industrial engineering. My discussion of these chapters will get shorter. Richard Schoenberg talks about industrial engineering as the real caretaker of lean production, and he identifies frustrations as the motivating force of lean production. In chapter 4, John Paul McDuffie discusses industrial relations. He talks about the balance of strategic goals, workplace issues, and knowledge sharing. He cautions against technical only lean, and since his background is with labor unions and industrial relations, he is very interested in workers participating in management. In chapter 5, the social science chapter, Darina myself and Andrea Signoretti talk about the two camps of lean in sociology. You have the positive camp and the negative camp, or say pro-lean and critical of lean. And so the social sciences are pretty much kind of divided between their viewpoint of lean. And in chapter 6, the labor process theory is pretty much hostile to lean production. However, I have to say the chapter by Chris Smith and Matt Vidal kind of mutes some of their hostility, perhaps because they realize they're in a book with lots of other people who are pro-lean, but nevertheless talk about the partial implementations of lean, which should be avoided. So to a certain degree, this theory section talks about pro-lean and contra-lean in terms of these different disciplinary views. And it, to some degree, the chapters that I'll emphasize will also point to some of these issues. In part 2 on industries, the first chapter is really about consultants with the True Lean program at the University of Kentucky, which has 2 Toyota executives on board each year loaned out. And they've consulted with hundreds of different firms over the last 30 years. And what's interesting about their approach is that they emphasize the evaluation of their methods to see whether or not they work or not with the companies that they work with. So you can look at their methods for evaluation. I think it's quite interesting. In chapter 11, I'm going to skip a few. Dr. John Toussaint talks about healthcare and basically says that healthcare has the largest quality control problems of any industry in the world. And he's pretty strong on this kind of point. He gives a lot of different specific ways that doctors and hospital administrators can confront these different problems, especially with rather specific A3 charts. In chapter 12, Kenneth Grady talks about implementation of lean production in law. This hasn't gone very far. He discusses changes in local, state, federal, and appellate courts. And all of these present very different kinds of situations that lawyers face. One major problem that he talks about is that private law firms emphasize billable hours, which basically means they have an incentive to increase the money coming into the firm by increasing their billable hours, which is almost exactly the opposite of what lean production would recommend. In chapter 15 on finance, Gene Cunningham covers lean production in banking and accounting. One problem that finance and accounting has is that finance or accounting looks at inventory as an asset on the balance sheet. As a result, why would you want to reduce your assets? So she basically recommends that accounting needs to totally change, especially cost accounting, which is very much part of the production process. That has to really change to accommodate lean production. In chapter 16 on software programming, Mary Poppendike talks about really some of the most innovative and technical firms in the world, Google, Apple, and Amazon, especially Amazon Web Services. And I think interprets what they have done in terms of lean production, and also kind of gives some kinds of advances. She doesn't say they're advances, but I kind of view them as advances on lean production. She says that much of what is developed in software has come from within the industry, and it hasn't come much from consultants and so on. She goes beyond agility programming and scrums and basically said, well, this was a good first step, but it really didn't go far enough. She focuses on DevOps and CI/CD principles. I'll define those shortly. She uses the metaphor of the cathedral and the bazaar. The cathedral represents perhaps bureaucracies, where you define problems and you have specific divisions work on those problems. Whereas the bazaar is a more of a market, open source kind of situation where everybody's working on the same sort of thing at the same time. She emphasizes that you more or less have to get rid of cost centers. Cost centers focus too much on accounting and reducing expenditures and so on. Not that expenditures shouldn't be reduced, but the emphasis should be on process flow. You know, how you're actually producing whatever product that you want to produce. She recommends that IT departments are a problem. IT should be distributed throughout the corporation or the organization. So quality testing further takes place through DevOps, which is development and operations together. You develop products and you produce products at the same time. And CI/CD, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment. So consequently, she's talking about something she calls trunk-based development. The trunk is the main product that you're going to deliver. And you want to avoid going off and developing your own branch products, which may then have complications with the main product or the trunk. So you have to constantly develop your programs within the trunk of the total program. She gives examples of SpaceX, Amazon Web Services, and Google as ways to do this. She criticizes people who come up with requirements at the beginning, because she basically says later on, all these requirements are going to change. Even your product may end up changing. I think this may be the case in software. It's kind of hard to imagine this in the automobile industry where your product totally changes. But within software, you can make these quick kinds of changes. Instead of focusing on waste, she focuses on frictions, inefficient flow, dependencies on other programs, emphasizing cost centers, which is a problem, having too many proxies or middlemen. And she gives the examples of SpaceX and ING Financial that went for a radical distribution of teams of requirements and operations into teams and squads, which totally transformed the ING bank in a number of different ways. One weakness of this approach was, if you have this open, bizarre distribution of knowledge, what are you going to do about security? So since then, we now have DevSecOps, which puts security into the process of DevOps right from the beginning. I think in a lot of ways, this chapter is a major success and a major advancement of the lean production story. For one, because it's in the advanced technology sector of Google and Amazon and so on, and Apple. And to some degree, the radical use of teams is somewhat of an advancement. Not that lean production doesn't have, teams as an important aspect, but these cross-functional, or as they call it, full stack teams, are something that goes beyond, say, the Toyota experience of what would be quality control. In section 3 on countries, chapter 17 by Timo Anttila, Tommy Olainen, and Armi Mustomaki from Finland conduct a 35-nation survey of 1,000 employees in every country. And I also convinced them to include the United States, so it went from 35 to 36. And they divide the production process as experienced by employees into lean, tailorist, traditional, and learning systems. And they find out that the United States and the UK are the leaders in lean production, with 48% and 46% of employees saying they experience it. Romania was at 38%, which I found surprising, although I have to admit, I don't know much about Romania. Germany was at 23% and Italy was at 25%, and many other countries were lower, and so on. So they basically support our view that lean production is the dominant division of labor at this point in time. Chapter 18 on Korea by Byung-Hoon Lee. It was a big surprise to me. I thought I'd see the implementation of lean production throughout Korea. Instead, he puts forth the Hyundai production system, which is not particularly lean. It may be lean in its use of engineers, but it's not particularly lean in terms of teams with workers on the line. So I was kind of surprised by this chapter. In chapter 19, James Womack and Daniel Jones talk about lean in the United States. They say a lot of different things, but one thing that stuck out to me is that they said lean is a slow learning process as opposed to a quick fix. And so consequently, it's something that will permeate a country slowly over long periods of time. In chapter 21, Martin Krishendinsky talks about the German diversified quality approach. Germany is quite different in its institutions with works councils, co-determination, relatively strong unions, and the strong apprenticeship system, which bolsters its craft sector. Now remember, Germany's only 23% lean according to the survey. Some people present diversified quality production as an alternative to lean. In chapter 22 on France by Beauvalet and Magnani, the thing that stood out to me is that the state plays a very strong role in terms of lean production. A bit different from the United States or the UK. And of course, that's kind of a characteristic of the French nation. And France was 36% lean according to the survey. In chapter 24 on India and Australia, this is a chapter I'd like to emphasize because it's kind of like a negative application of lean. And it focuses on Toyota, which is the company that really promulgated lean. You have TKM, Toyota, Kirloskar Motors near Bangalore, and you have TMCA, Toyota Motors Corporation Australia, near Melbourne. In both of these cases, the Toyota companies ran into major kinds of problems. Caste was a major problem in India. There were situations where various castes would refuse to do certain kinds of work. There were strong unions that were connected to political parties, and the connection of political parties to lean was something that I think lean is not experienced in other situations, although you could say it's somewhat similar to China. As culturally, there were big differences. Toyota saw Indian workers as being undisciplined. Indian workers saw Toyota managers as being Nazis and not being concerned about the welfare of their families. The workers said they would make up for the time that they missed by working overtime, but Toyota managers were not particularly interested in that. You needed to be there. In Australia, there's a different kind of situation with labor supply where workers are not as available as they are in other countries. There are also strong unions. Culturally, there's evidence of individualism. There's sort of a culture of no worries, mate. We'll work it out in the future sometime, which didn't particularly go along with the Toyota kind of approach. Working with teams was referred to as arse kissing in Australian vernacular. And to some degree, Reynold James basically says that Toyota had a certain amount of hubris when they really entered into the market into these two countries. right around 1999. They were there before, but 1999, they really emphasized their approach. And lean production was riding high at this point in time. So consequently, there were major strikes. There were all sorts of problems in India, and in Australia. Toyota eventually just left, or at least this plant subsequently closed down. I think this contrasts to the situation that Darina and I experienced at Toyota Georgetown in the United States. They started in 1982, and Japanese were very sensitive to cultural issues. They had a 3-car lottery where people could win a car if they had perfect attendance. They had annual celebrations at Rupp Arena with, country and Western bands. They played Kentucky basketball games on the radio during while people were at work, because Kentucky's important, or basketball is an important cultural value in Kentucky. And they also paid very close attention to the integration of women into the workforce, which is something that is relatively foreign to the Japanese experience. So just in conclusion to my part, I'd like to say that I think the handbook demonstrates that lean production is the new dominant division of labor, but it's not perfect. It needs cultural adjustment, as we see from the India and Australia example. But tremendous strides, I think, have been made in terms of lean production concerning the software industry, where I think many different kinds of new and fertile ideas are emerging concerning lean production. Okay, I'll leave it there and hand it over to Darina.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. And Anna, this is good. It's okay to keep the slide here. We would like to use this opportunity to also introduce to you another book that we published last year with Routledge. It's called Framing and Managing Lean Organizations in the New Economy. And we think this book is particularly very useful to use for training and consulting, because it provides several case studies of lean organizations. And obviously, we know there were hundreds of books published about the Toyota system of production. Toyota and Honda are the most well-known ideal types of lean organizations. But in this book, we also describe the lean models and the lean cultures of 8 different organizations that have several degrees of lean implementation. As we know, it's very rare for an organization to have perfect, immaculate implementation of lean 100%. So Toyota and Honda, we said, has 100% of lean implementation. And Ford and Nissan, at this point, will have like 60%. But what's really unique is that we are providing an analysis of how lean manufacturing works for Nike, for Apple and Google, as well as for Walmart, Costco, and Amazon. And we know some of these are some of the leading Fortune 500 companies in the world, if you look at Apple and Amazon. And next slide, Anna. Thank you. Okay, so many of you might be familiar with this. Obviously, Toyota system of production is the ideal type of a lean organization, excuse me. So what you see here is the organization model of a Toyota that looks like a house with several pillars. What's very interesting is to know that like the Asian philosophy and the Asian values are really the foundation of this model. So the Toyota system is grounded on the Asian cultural values of harmony in the workplace, of collectivism, and of respect for humanity. So some of the major goals of ideal lean systems is to produce the best quality car for the lowest possible cost in the shortest amount of time, while at the same time having the best safety and the best high morale for employees, right? So it sounds really ideal. On one pillar, you'll see the just-in-time production. That is that you are going to deliver a product only if there's a demand on the market. You minimize inventory as much as possible. On the right pillar, you see the principles of using the end-on cord, that is stopping production to fix a defect. That means that workers are empowered to have this decision-making power. It's standardized work. And right at the heart of the model, what you see in the middle is the minimization of waste in material, waste in time, and unnecessary movements in the cycle of production. But people are at the heart of the model. So you can see as people and teamwork being the central, really the core of the model. Moving next. Anna, thank you. Okay, so we would like to reveal more about the soft side of lean, right? So how do you build a lean culture? What's really interesting about Toyota is this complementarity between the social and the technical aspects. Obviously, there is an absolute obsession with quality and the cleanliness. Those of you probably know about the 5 S's, and the 3 M's. So we're not going to go that much into that. But it's basically building a culture that is focusing on problem solving and empowering workers to really take charge and initiative in the workplace in finding solutions to solve problems as they arise. Toyota practices a culture of tensions and contradictory viewpoints, meaning that in these quality circles, workers are encouraged to really voice their opinions, even if it might look like they sow tension and conflict in the workplace. But that is welcome, because from the brainstorming of new ideas, that's how new products and new solutions of doing the work better arise. The culture of quality is to never be satisfied, that there always has to be a better way. So even when Toyota became the largest car producer in the world for many years in a row, remember the president of Toyota saying that for us, it's not satisfactory that we're selling the highest volume of cars. We want to be the best in terms of quality. So it's not getting comfortable, that your product is good enough, always striving to find something better. So it's a culture of innovation that is very tolerant to failure and to mistakes. So you cannot experiment, you cannot innovate unless you take responsibility for failure. But however, what's most important is like in quotes that are coming from the top executives of Toyota, is that you need to cut all costs, but do not cut people. So far in the United States, they've been really loyal to this principle, trying not to cut their people and just offering a very long-term employment opportunity in the factories. But like we argue in our 4 books on the topics already, you can protect your permanent workers only by sacrificing the contract workers, the temporary workers. This is a part that is not so often discussed with Toyota and Honda models. If you want to move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a picture from Honda, Alabama, where we've done research. I think it's easy to see in the picture how workers are wearing the same uniform regardless of the hierarchy and rank in the company. So even the CEO of the factory wears the same white overalls. Just looking around, you can notice the impeccable cleanliness of the factory and how impeccable the white uniforms are. So cleanliness is obviously another major aspect of the lean culture. Next slide. So we've decided to add a chapter on Honda because oftentimes in all the lean literature, you find a lot about the Toyota system of production. Just obviously, there's been so much literature on it since the 30s, but we found that Honda is more shrouded in mystery. We couldn't find that many studies done on Honda, and we really wanted to know what's going on there. So Tom had several visits and interviews at the Honda factory in Ohio, and actually we went together to the one in Alabama. So we found out that their culture, although they are both perfect lean philosophy, the Honda culture is a bit different from the Toyota culture. So first of all, Honda has more of a, let's say, a non-conformist culture. So they started as a small motorcycle company. The Japanese government did not give them permission to actually produce cars in Japan in order not to compete with Toyota. And that's when they really took the very risky approach to just pack their things and move to North America. And now they've been so successful, and the biggest market that they have is in North America. So their culture is a little bit more rebellious and risk-taking. They portray themselves as a mobility company. So when they started with a motorcycle, first they started with the motorcycle industry, and they really competed and took over Harley Davidson, which was a classic in the United States. Again, they don't have a culture of layoffs. They'd like to keep their workers long-term because they invest in their training. And once you invest in your workers, you don't want to let them go. And we've noticed the same culture of cultivating paradox and contradiction. So, with these autonomous themes, workers are always encouraged to disagree with each other and to always come up with the better solution of doing things. And obviously, this model is what we call a flexible bureaucracy, and that's characterized by organizational learning. And next slide, please. So you have here a quote from the current president of Honda, Alabama, who said, "No one will blame you for making a mistake if you tried something new. In fact, you may be promoted for that. However, you could fall out of favor if you're afraid to stray from what worked before, no matter how well it worked." So this is really true to the founder of the company's philosophy, Soichiro Honda, who says success is 99% failure. So it's just, a culture of innovation that is built in the heart of the model. Next slide, please. So here we try to compare and contrast the two models. And a metaphor that is often used to describe Toyota is that they look like the Toyota workers look like the Roman soldiers in the Roman legions. So very disciplined. The structure of the organization is very hierarchical, whereas with Honda, their workers are portrayed as guerrilla fighters. We like that metaphor because it was symbolic for how the workers are prepared to really anticipate hazard and chaos and very unpredictable shifts in the economy, which obviously happened. Just look at the pandemic. So the Honda culture seems to be more focused on risk-taking. Also, the control from Japan is not as strong on all the operations, on the global operations. So factories overseas have more local control than with Toyota. There are big differences in the way they conceptualize teamwork. So at Toyota, they operate with small teams of about 4 to 5 workers. Whereas at Honda, their concept of teams is a little bit more loose. They have larger groups of 18 to 20 workers, but overall, they think when they say team, they think of Team Honda, right? So the company team, but not so much of the small unit of workers they work with. We found out that if you ask a Honda worker what is their system of production, they will not say it's Toyota system of production, right? That's the ideal type. They will not say it's lean production. They basically just take some tools from the model and use it, but they would not define themselves, if you ask them, as implementing lean production in their factories. Yeah, so, Toyota is more obsessed with cutting costs, and Honda is more focused on innovation and flexibility and organizational learning. So some major differences that I think are not so obvious to the researchers, again, because there were not that many researchers that visited the Honda factories in the past. And next slide. So another case that we would like to present to you, just to get your interest in this book, if you want to read more of these cases, is the case of Apple. I know most of the time Apple is not associated with lean, but we identified many elements of lean culture that they have. And in our book, we coined a new concept of siliconism to describe the organizational model that several of the IT companies in Silicon Valley use. So what's interesting about Apple is that their teams at home, so their American operations, so to speak, use a lean model based on semi-autonomous creative teams. The work there is very intensive. Apple workers easily bank 12 hours of work a day. Some of them even report sleeping at night at the office if they have a product launch that week. But obviously, people that work in research and development in Silicon Valley are only a small fraction of people that work for Apple. And their factories overseas in Asia, mostly China, are very Fordist manufacturing. So we say this is a hybrid model, right? That it uses a lean culture in the United States, but has Fordist operations overseas. Okay, next, please. Okay, so more examples of the lean culture at Apple. The supply chain management is obviously central to their operations. They keep minimal inventory. Even their factories in China, they are told to keep inventory only for a day or two. And in Steve Jobs' words, he wanted to have a team culture of pirates, not of the Navy. So not a very hierarchical, discipline-based institution, but the pirates that are always searching for the best opportunity to seize opportunity for the company to thrive. It's a very minimalist culture that reduces waste. It's one legendary story about Steve Jobs is that first of all, he preferred very small teams. He said, then when you have a meeting, you shouldn't have more people present than slices of pizza. So it was called the pizza meetings. He preferred very small teams. And once he met with his designers about the production of the iPod, and his employees were telling him, this is the smallest we could design this iPod. There's no way we could make this more smaller or more sleek. So he's famous for taking the iPod in his hands and dropped it in a fish tank. And you could see the air bubbles going up. And then he told his workers, you see, there's air going up. That means there is still room for you to eliminate waste from the iPod. So it's again, a model that's based on continuous improvement. Obviously, we all know about the Apple ecosystem with how all the products support each other. Next slide, please. Okay, so actually, can you go to next, please? Yes, so before I talk about Romania, I wanted to talk about Russia. In the Cambridge Handbook, we have a chapter on Russia that I thought is very interesting because it can connect somehow with the situation in Romania. So Elena Shozenko went and visited several factories, VW, Volkswagen, Toyota, and Gaz, to see how was lean experimented or experienced in Russia, which we know, like Poland has a booming auto industry. And I found very interesting that her findings, I'd say, could relate somewhat to the Romanian context because it's about the auto industry in a post-communist context. So what she found out was that in the Russian factories, there's still very authoritarian management, very traditional structure. Workers have very strong loyalty for each other, but it's mostly through personal connections, right? So people have a lot of informal relations with other colleagues at work, and all together distrust the hierarchy and they distrust the rules. So she found out there is strong resistance to lean in these factories. I thought that was really interesting. She discovered that workers were dismissed more often for disciplinary reasons than, for instance, the same Toyota or VW factories in China, right? So there are more disciplined workers over there. Other things that happened were really very intriguing because the workers had a higher rate of defects in their work on the assembly line, and that created conflicts with quality control inspectors. So the workers kind of were trying to bribe or to make deals with the quality control inspectors to not report the defects, because if they reported the defects, workers would lose their bonus. So I thought that was really interesting. There's limited job rotation. So in Russia, there is a partial implementation of lean at this point. Also, it looks like the workers are not prepared enough or trained enough. That's part of the reason, but there's also a culture, perhaps the post-communist legacy, that makes difficult yet the implementation of the lean principles. Perhaps it takes time, like Tom mentioned, that it takes time to adjust to this new model. So there's limited job rotation. For instance, the end-on cord that here in the United States is easily accessible by workers. In Russia, it's only the supervisor that can pull the end-on cord, right? So it's very autocratic and doesn't allow for enough empowerment of workers to take decisions. And if you don't mind, Anna, to go to the previous slide at 15, perfect. So just some concluding thoughts about how can this be applied to the Romanian context. First off, I couldn't find a lot of research on lean implementation in Romania. But it looks like Romania has a booming industry that could apply lean. At this point, we have 500 auto factories and suppliers. It is the most important industry in Romania. It's the same most important industry in the United States. And Romania has almost 90% of its auto labor force engaged in the supplier, right, in the body parts for cars producing for the entire European Union. So there's huge potential there. We found a very interesting study. I think it's on the first bullet point, where the researchers from University of Cluj were reflecting if the lean model has a good fit with the Romanian culture. So I think this is a very intriguing questions. I would be very interesting to, I don't know, to investigate this more in the future and to do more research in the car factories in Romania if we have opportunities. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity now with electrical cars and the hybrid cars to adopt the lean models to a larger extent on the Romanian market. And I will stop here and see if you have questions. I don't know if Tom, if you want to add anything else that maybe I have missed.
Just one point about, we talked about Toyotism, a three-part model of lean production: Toyotism, Siliconism or Nikeification, kind of based on the Nike shoe company, and third, Waltonism, based on Walmart. And there was I think there was a debate on LinkedIn about this in terms of, we're kind of approaching it from describing lean throughout industry. So consequently, we look at full lean, partial lean, and kind of like minimal lean in these examples. And I think there was some commentary about, why would you ever recommend minimal lean? Well, we don't recommend minimal lean. We're just saying it's out there. So for instance, with Walmart, you just get just-in-time inventory and not much with anything else concerning lean. And of course, you kind of have the bifurcated model of Apple, where they make most of their products in China, usually with subcontractors, but nevertheless, they have a tremendous influence on what those subcontractors do. And then they have much more emphasis on teams in the United States and other places where they are doing technical kinds of work. So I just wanted to mention that, emphasize that three-part model of Toyotism, Siliconism, and Waltonism as sort of like the top, the middle, and the bottom of the actual application of lean production. So just that one point.
Great. Thank you, Tom. In the end, I just want to conclude that we're very grateful to have this opportunity to meet with you today. I think it's very important for academics to be in this constant dialogue with business practitioners. There's so much to learn. So we welcome your questions, and also wanted to show you the books that we published together on this topic. So these two are
Darina,
the
if you could just go back to that last slide, or Elena. Diversity at Kaizen Motors. There is no company that I know of called Kaizen Motors. The legal department of the major automobile manufacturers that we dealt with basically said we could not use the name. So you might be curious what Kaizen Motors is, and it's basically a pseudonym for a major auto company in the US, Japanese auto company.
Yeah. Thank you. Questions?
Well, I've got one. I've got a couple of questions before anyone else wants to put questions in. You have the chat box if you're watching us on Zoom. If you're on Facebook, please type it in the chat there, and my colleagues will spot that and ask the question. I'm putting my visa residence permit in jeopardy. Well, I'm intrigued that you say that lean fits Romanian culture. I was thinking back to what you were saying about the idea that if you don't challenge what you're doing, even if it works, you will not be promoted. I think certainly in the older companies, I'm thinking back to privatizations I worked on as a lawyer and looking at the corporate culture, definitely wasn't the culture I noticed. Now, okay, we're now in the era of having Romanian unicorns, particularly in the IT sector. But how do you see the culture of today's Romanian business people? Are they accepting lean principles and challenging what is done and finding another way?
I think you could help me a lot better answering this question because you guys are working there in the field. So our research mostly happened in North America. But if I could put on my Romanian hat, what I could say is that Romanians are very collectivistic, and I could see how teamwork is very important for them, especially working in these small teams. It would fit as a glove with let's say the Romanian spirit, the Romanian ethos. I would say they share with the other Eastern European this distrust for authority and distrust for rules, and that's really the post-communist legacy. So definitely whoever comes to one of the Romanian factories and wants to implement lean would definitely need to sociological, almost ethnographic analysis of how can we adapt this to the Romanian context, because otherwise it could end up like in Russia, where you fire a lot of workers for insubordination. I'd say a lot of them will insubordinate. So you really need to understand the context, and that's when sociologists and anthropologists and human resources specialists could join their efforts to understand how can you transplant successfully an organizational model to a different culture.
Thank you. I think that kind of leadership and a willingness to, yes, by all means, distrust authority. I think there's a fair degree of that. I mean, the Chamber has recently been involved in promoting the vaccines for COVID, because I understood that there was, let's say, a degree of skepticism in some parts of the society here about the benefits of being vaccinated. And so we and other chambers were promoting that as the way to get back to some degree of normality. Do you think it would help if there were, well, I know that some of our directors in the chamber know about Kaizen. They're part of large multinationals, and this is part of their training and culture. What about elsewhere in society? Who should, I mean, this is great that you put this on today, and particularly that Enviso have brought you here to give us this presentation, but what else can be done to promote these kind of principles to the average business?
Well, obviously, based on the book and presentation that Tom gave, we can see an opportunity with implementing in hospitals. I know in Romania, there's a huge crisis, especially in the public healthcare system, that badly need reform. So definitely lean would be one way to go to try to increase efficiency and minimize error. But I have to say, we live in North America and we're still struggling with these things like vaccine hesitancy and medical error in the healthcare system. And obviously, I think Romanians could be persuaded, saying, look, what you had before, the organizational models that you had before that were basically more Tayloristic, more Fordist, obviously it didn't work, right? Because they were not as efficient, because most of the communist factories have closed because they were inefficient. So you need to co-opt workers by by showing that this is in their best interest. If you want this factory to work, we need to try this. But building cooperation from the bottom up rather than top down will be more efficient. But I can definitely see how the lean philosophy could help with healthcare reform, perhaps in the banking sector. Is that what the beer industry? I will let you also share, whoever is present today, to tell me more about what companies adopted lean already in Bucharest or around the country.
If I could add to that, I take off my hat of representing authors from the handbook and put on my own hat and be, a little bit critical of some of the authors concerning hospitals. Healthcare, since you mentioned healthcare is a very difficult industry to apply lean principles because healthcare is very hierarchical. And doctors have a very strong position within the healthcare system. However, nurses are most often present with patients on a daily basis. And then you also have nursing assistants and respiratory therapists, and then you have the lab and so on and so forth. And so consequently, breaking down this particular form of hierarchy within the hospital or medical care system is something that requires teamwork between these different professions, and the professions make it very hierarchical. And I tried to convince some of the authors to talk more about nurses, but I was unsuccessful with that. But nevertheless, it's my personal opinion that you need, say, multi-professional teams that involve everyone within the hospital setting or the medical setting, so that you can have something that's more effective in implementing lean production.
Thank you. I would make a prediction here. One of the functions of the chamber is to provide a safe place to ask questions, particularly if business members don't wish to be seen to be asking in their own name, if we're putting questions to government here or in the UK or elsewhere. And my feeling is, from what you've explained about lean and the way it can improve a business, is that people may feel you've got a good audience listening to your presentation, but I suspect there may be a degree of reticence about asking questions in public. So I think you've mentioned that we can make available your slides to attendees.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. I have a feeling also that the kind of, I'm slightly nervous because I run a law firm, and your comments about how you apply lean to an hours-based billing law firm is an interesting discussion. And it comes down to the question of, do you ever guarantee success, or is it best efforts? Now, I'm not sure how you fix that. I've thought about it quite a lot. I suspect that other people's businesses, and you've mentioned medical, and we have medical members of the chamber. So what we perhaps ought to be doing is suggesting to Constantin that perhaps the recording of this particular presentation and the slides might be interested to be sent to some of our members in the industry.
Absolutely.
We've outlined.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for accepting my invitation. I actually have a question for you. I remember that a few years ago I was invited in a lean implementation program for a multinational utility company. And when I arrived there for the kickoff meeting, I could feel the tension between the management and the operators. So I found out that lean methodology was perceived there as as a hungry monster that feeds with the people's jobs. So the union leaders, very strong at that moment, were threatening the management team with a strike. So I received the task to organize a lean training session with the union leaders to explain to them what lean is about. So I'm afraid that I had to reinvent the wheel. I wish I had your book at that time, because I realized that there were hundreds, thousands of books explaining from the technical point of view what lean is about, but very few or even none explaining from a social point of view what lean is about and how to implement lean, avoiding social tensions. So the question would be, how would you deal with this kind of situations when lean is perceived to be the worst thing that could happen in an organization?
This is very interesting because also when Toyota and Honda first opened operations in the United States, and we're talking about the early 80s, they did that in the middle of very strong anti-Japanese sentiment, right? Because Japanese factories were seen as threatening the American car companies. And it took time, and finally now there's a strong support for the foreign car companies to come to the United States. A lot of the American, like I said, the big American giants, Ford, GM, Chrysler, are exporting for other countries. But it took time to pass that phase, right? So there's also this rejection of a foreign model that seems like it's being imposed on you, right? And there could be some nationalistic, sentiments there, that we're not going to sell our country or our factory to the foreign foreign investors. You're talking about unions, but also in the United States, most of these Japanese factories have very strong anti-union sentiments, and they've tried to avoid the unionized areas. And Tom knows this very well. And this is how the auto industry migrated from the northern United States to the southern United States, because in the South, people are not unionized. So the Japanese executives' explanation was that if we take care of our people, if we have a very strong human resources management, if we provide great benefits, if we provide employment for life, if we provide very safe jobs, if we pay for overtime, and a lot of the workers are paid better for every overtime hour, if we provide these excellent benefits, our workers don't need to unionize. And Tom can maybe chip in here a little bit about how all the unionization efforts in the auto industry, especially with the foreign car companies, have failed in the United States.
I wouldn't.
No?
Let me just make 2 points, and then discuss a Mazda plant that did have the UAW present. First, as I mentioned before, Toyota Georgetown came out with a lot of incentives that were viewed as being incredible. Like, you can get a free car. 4 to 5 people can get a free car each year for having perfect attendance. That's almost like unheard of in industries where the product is very, very costly. And then just the other things about being sensitive to the culture. And a second point is sensitivity to power as opposed to resistance. In teams, workers are given a certain amount of power to affect their workplace through quality control suggestions and so on. And at the Georgetown plant, they made some major aspects of uh, of safety changes, such as bringing the dashboard into the car and assembling it. They created a mechanism where the mechanism would actually go into the car. Now that's automated, so it's somewhat obsolete example, but nevertheless, the workers did come up with that. And so differentiating power in terms of affecting your workplace versus just kind of like resistance to every, thing that, management wants to do. But let's look at the Mazda factory. The Mazda factory was unionized with the UAW. Mazda in Flat Rock, Michigan. Mazda started it out as a greenfield site. They went through extensive winnowing of workers and selecting, for every person they hired, there were probably 100 people that applied. And they selected people that would fit the approach that Mazda wanted to have, which is very much a lean kind of approach, but they also had the UAW. So the UAW leaders in the Mazda plant basically more or less had to agree with the lean production approach, and they were very worried that they would be labeled as against lean production. As a result, they agreed with most of what management was doing and was very hesitant to, which is actually probably the opposite of the example that you had. But nevertheless, they agreed with just about everything. And then the next union election that came up, they were soundly defeated by the Stand Up for Your Rights faction, which then became very resistant to, actually they didn't become that resistant, but they voiced a lot more displeasure of what was going on in the plant. So the point I'm getting to is that union leaders who are oftentimes leading, the charge against lean production are in a situation where they have to be careful that they don't want to get voted out of office. They want to keep their jobs. And so consequently, we have to kind of come up with a relatively, what would I say, understanding of the union leader's position so that you can negotiate a more favorable approach to lean. So consequently, you have to give them some power to protest against certain things. You can't label them as being anti-lean if they basically say something is not right. If you have safety problems, they need to be able to express it so that they're not viewed as being anti-lean. On the other hand, you want cooperation and you don't want continuous resistance from the union leaders. So I'm not saying I have a perfect solution to this, but I'm just saying, sensitivity towards the union leader position and getting the union leader person to cooperate with lean is critical. But you can't let them just become totally lean, because then the workers will turn against them. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that helps, but that's just my comment on that situation.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thinking in the Romanian context, we think of Ford in Craiova and Dacia Renault near Pitești, and what has happened to the likes of UTV, Roman, Aro. And I think, I don't know, I presume that both Ford and Dacia Renault are no strangers to what you've been describing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And similarly in the UK, you think, near John, up in Wearside, you've got Nissan and Honda in Swindon, neither of which I think are traditional places for building cars. So I think, again, you can see that same application of a different approach. Now, I suspect we're not going to have questions, because I think part of the need for this is to recognize that you're not doing things as well as you could be now. And that can be difficult, perhaps, to ask that question in public. So I've seen similar things. I hasten to say that I'm the guy who, when I first heard about Kaizen from one of my fellow directors on the chamber board, thought he was talking about Japanese beer. But I suspect we're going to find that there are questions that come up separately after this discussion. So if you are watching us on Facebook or on Zoom and don't wish to answer a question here, that's fine. Let us know. We'll happily put you in touch with Constantin and his colleagues if you wish to discuss these questions further. As regards where you go next with lean, is it fair to say that lean is perhaps a slightly dangerous concept or expression, because it sounds like lean and mean, and we're going to start trimming off the extras around the operation, and therefore all your nice little goodies and perks are going to go? If there were another way of describing this, how would you do it? Or is that where the Six Sigma comes from?
No, actually, I'd like to just try and answer that, Neil, because a lot of people now are trying to disassociate the word lean from Toyota, from auto manufacturing in general, and from Asian culture. And we're trying to show that many of the principles and tools in lean actually go back a long way before they were used at Toyota and before they were used in Japan. They were used in the USA, they were used in Great Britain, they were used in Europe. And for example, the first chapter of the book, which happens to talk about division of labor, the first factory to implement division of labor was actually 1776 in a Scottish pin making factory, and it was Adam Smith. And he increased the throughput by many-fold using division of labor. And of course, it wasn't called lean, and we haven't called improvement of processes lean. We didn't call it lean for decades and decades where lean principles were being used. So yes, the word lean actually can be a disadvantage in explaining basic process improvement to workers, and they may have a negative attitude because we're using the word lean, and it needs to be clearly explained to them, and as Constantin had to do to get them to see that really you can't be anti-lean, because if you're anti-lean, you're anti-improvement. Lean itself is just the word we use to explain the collection of principles and tools for process improvement, and it applies in every culture and every industry. So one of the reasons we liked very much your book was that it brought together, it was a collection of great ideas from many different backgrounds, many different countries. And it's very thought-provoking. It's going to create a lot of great discussion this year and in future years. I think it's going to be quoted a lot and used in a lot of by academics and industrialist businessmen alike. And in fact, there has been a lot of talk in this discussion about automotive and about Toyota, but you do recognize that there's the Siliconism, there's the Waltonism, there's the retail, there's the Walmart, and you have chapters in your book on lean in telecommunications, lean in public services and government. You have a chapter on the retail industry with Walmart. The financial services is a massive industry which is very interested in improving its processes and is going to have to be to stay competitive. You've got lean in software. So at the International Lean Six Sigma Institute, we are a collection of professionals that are working in process improvement, in quality improvement. And in fact, a lot of people don't use the word lean in their job description, but actually they are practicing lean. So I think we have to try to educate people, explain to people what we mean when we use the word lean, and it's not, it shouldn't be scary, to your point, Neil.
Well, perhaps we're coming to the end of our allotted time, and again with an invitation to those watching, if they wish to ask a question, or to be put in touch for a separate discussion, please get in touch. We can put you in touch with Constantin and Enviso and with yourselves. I know because one of our most active members, and again, thank you to Enviso and Constantin for bringing us this afternoon's discussion. But to Darina and Constantin, if lean can be misinterpreted, can you think of a Romanian term you'd use instead?
Flexible.
Yes, flexibility, efficiency, maybe.
In limba română, cum zicem?
Lean? No,
Yeah.
there is no translation. We are using it. I mean, we just took it lean as it is.
Right. It's true. It's a little bit hard to translate.
Yes. But in the end is efficiency, and we have a word for this. But I would say it's more than efficiency, because it's also culture. It's, you know.
Absolutely. That's why in some of our books, we call it lean, flexible, and loyal, because, you know, loyalty and teamwork is a big part of it. Tom, you wanted to add something and I cut you off.
I was just going to say in our book, we refer to lean as an unfortunate choice. So I agree with what John said. It was kind of imposed by people at MIT in I think it was 1988. But the Japanese did not use the word lean. You know, each company used their own Toyota process, you know, system, or the Honda production system, and so on and so forth. So lean was a little foreign to the Japanese. Unfortunately, it has some connections to, for instance, the political aspect of neoliberalism, which is very much cutting, you know, cutting government expenditures and so on and so forth. And in the chapter I talked about software, they're very much against cost containment and getting rid of people. They're all for focusing on process flow and getting the product right. However, even though we felt somewhat uncomfortable with the term lean, we felt we had to use it because it just had so much currency.
It's got so much power at the moment. The name has got a lot of power, so that's why we use it. Yeah, but
you know, for instance, globalization and global, you know, it's sort of like certain words have a lot of power.
But just as a concluding thought, from our research, at least in the United States, I don't think the workers still perceive this model as lean and mean. So this association happened maybe like 30, 40 years ago when these factories just opened here in the United States. But now they're pretty popular with the workers, right? Because they were tested and workers saw they worked. And again, to go back to Constantin's example, I think it's crucial for the workers to see that they have a benefit in it, like that it works also in their best interest. Most of the workers that we interviewed were actually enjoying their work, and they were enthusiastic to work there in these lean systems, right? They're not perfect, but they definitely have better reputation than the traditional Fordist systems.
Just to go back to the Mazda example, many of the complaints of workers there were that management was not following the lean practices that they recommended, such as the equality between managers and workers, you know, the sharing of parking spaces and so on, eating in the same cafeteria, you know, wearing the same clothes, and not fulfilling the teamwork practices that they promised that they would. So consequently, to some degree, there's a management worker sort of thing. If you can fulfill the promises of lean, even when management doesn't want to do it, that can get workers on your side.
Yeah, useful thoughts on that. I think we're on time, and I'll get shouted at if I don't bring us to a close. Constantin, thank you very much indeed to you and Enviso for bringing what I think has been a really interesting presentation from Darina, Tom, and John. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions coming to you. Please be in touch with Anna regarding sharing the slides. And I look forward to, I think you might wish to talk to Anna about having a word with some of our particular members who are in the industries which you think are particularly suitable for this kind of thing. Thank you all very much. Need a most interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anna,
Thank you very much.
what's our next event, please?
Thank you, Neil. I would also like to give some thanks to Darina and Tom for the very informative presentation and the way you actually delivered all the information. It was very useful and interesting indeed. Our next event is actually very fun that we've discussed about Romania and businesses in Romania, because our next event is Doing Business in Romania. It's actually our third event from a series that we have in partnership with the British Chambers of Commerce. This one, the third one, is in partnership with Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, and it will be in 1 week time from 12 p.m. Romanian time. And we're having audiences from both Romanian and UK, and so are the panelists. So from both UK and Romania.
You
Well,
said 12 p.m. Romanian time. You mean noon, not midnight.
Exactly.
So that's 10 o'clock in the UK.
In the UK, yeah.
12 noon in Romania. And what time it will be in Georgia and North Carolina, I hate to think.
7 hours difference.
And you have a link there in the chat box to the piece for that. So thank you all very much indeed for this afternoon. For those of you who are starting the day, I wish you a good day. For those of you who are finishing the day, I wish you a very good evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank
you. It's
you.
a pleasure to know you all, to meet you all. Have a great
Thank you, Tom.
Bye. We stay in touch, Constantin, and thank you, Anna.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.